Things you own end up owning you.
Alyssa
Hi,
Luck. Hey,
that's
welcome back.
me.
Welcome to the podcast. You've
Thank
been on here
you.
before. We did this and we fucked it up. I clearly fucked it up. I'm sorry. We're doing it another shot, or giving it another shot. So
Yeah, I'm excited.
I'm happy to have you here.
Yes, thank you.
So listen, let's get right to it.
All right.
You have been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis.
Yes. So that is indeed how I entered into the whole wonderful world of health, nutrition, whatever, like online vortex of like information, misinformation, nonsense is happening that we're both in. But yeah, so I figured to start, maybe I should give a little just brief background about like who I am and like what my background is.
Yeah.
So just so that people have a little bit of context about who I am, because I don't know, I feel like anytime I'm listening to somebody that I don't know, I'm always kind of wondering like, oh, like who is this person?
Yeah.
So my educational background, I have a degree in nutrition. So I studied nutritional biochemistry in college, which I only did because of the aforementioned diagnosis. I was sick and was just wildly clamoring around trying to figure out how to solve my problems, and got totally sucked into the world of nutrition and made that my degree choice. I had the opportunity to be a research assistant in a couple different labs, not that much, but enough to let me dip my toes in the water of bench science and of clinical science. I was a research assistant for Chris Kresser for a while. So right.
Big name. That was a big name back in the, I mean, now he's kind of, I don't know if he's fallen. I'm sure he's still around, but yeah, he's not quite as popular these days, I feel like.
Yeah, he definitely was. I thought he was a huge name when I started working for him, and I was very starstruck. And it was a fun position, but got a lot of experience just reading scientific journals and writing about health and writing about science during that time. So all that to say, I have a pretty solid grounding in science, but I don't have any higher education. I've never worked with patients or anything like that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
And at the same time, it's not like just a Instagram kind of Facebook post following those sort of health nutrition advice kind of thing. So you've actually studied it in school.
Yeah,
so
exactly. And if anybody has ever been to my website, you'll see that I will do these little research projects for myself where I kind of disappear for 3 months and like read everything there is to know on a topic and then write a ridiculously long post about it that nobody will ever read. So I've done that recently on things like heart rate variability and something called polyvagal theory, which also has to do with the autonomic nervous system, which is, spoiler alert, kind of what I'm going to talk about today. And yeah, so I have just little, I'll get really into a certain interest and really dig down deep. But just zooming out a little bit, I don't belong to any camp. I don't really have, I'm not like on a side. I don't ascribe to any specific like diet framework. I'm not pro Western medicine or anti-Western medicine. I don't know. I feel like it's important to kind of, or helpful to clarify that, because I feel like people sometimes categorize.
Yeah, people love to do that.
Yeah. They love to categorize like,
at the same
is she
time,
one of us or one of them?
Yeah, it makes life a little bit easier that way. But at the same time, life is not black and white. People say that, but sometimes they forget that. So it's good to hear that you have a good, holistic view, I guess, or whatever, little zoomed out kind of view.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah, as far as like taking you back to your diagnosis, it's just interesting to me because besides you, like I know 3 other people in my life that have had either Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. I mean, it does seem to be like a very popular, very common thing these days. And the more
very
like
popular, very in demand,
very, very in demand. Yeah. So it's like a very common thing, man. And it's,
yeah, surprisingly so. In a sense, I was kind of like a trendsetter. Because I was diagnosed when I was 14 and I'm 28 now, almost 29. So it's 15 years ago, 15 years ago. And the health and treatment landscape is quite different in a lot of ways now from when I was diagnosed, and similar in others. But yeah, anyway.
And you mean like even as far as going to the doctor, it's not how they used to treat it back then and how they treat it now has already changed. You're saying that much?
That's one thing I'm unfortunately a little out of touch with, because I've been out of the main medical system for quite a while now. But as far as I know, the general treatment and prognosis is still pretty similar, which is it's kind of rough. So basically, when you get diagnosed, they initially put you on generally some kind of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory to just kind of, so for anybody who doesn't know, ulcerative colitis is an autoimmune disease where your body attacks the cells in your colon. Crohn's disease is very similar. The only difference is that your body can attack different places throughout your digestive tract. So people with Crohn's often have like really bad inflammation in their ileum, for instance, of their small intestine.
And can even go up as far as their mouth or esophagus.
Yeah.
So it's a little more intense version of a similar thing.
Yeah, exactly. And more just widespread. But like most autoimmune diseases, there's no consensus on what causes it, and there's no cure for it. So the general approach is just to stop the inflammation, stop the immune system from attacking itself. So non-steroidal anti-inflammatories will address that. Like any other anti-inflammatory, it just knocks the immune system down a little bit. If that doesn't work, they will normally go up a level to the more biologically active drugs. And my understanding of the pharmacology of IBD drugs is pretty fuzzy, but essentially they just get more and more intense and also more and more dangerous as far as the potential side effects, and having other, like, really weakening your immune system and making you more susceptible to colds or anything else like that. And the general pattern is that the first drug that's tried, people will kind of respond to that for a while, go into remission where their symptoms go away for a little bit. Then they'll have a flare up where their symptoms come back. And at some point, generally, the drug stops working. It's not enough to control their symptoms. And at that point, they go up a level to the next tier of drug. And then you just kind of go up and up and up until there's nothing left. And then in the case of ulcerative colitis, the next step is surgery to just take out the colon, because if you don't have a colon, it can't be inflamed, right?
And that's what happened to you?
That is what happened to me. Again, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. How many years was it before you got the surgery that you went through this?
So for me, it was only 2.5 years, which is very short in like, it's unusual, as far as I know, a couple of things about my case were unusual. The first is that I really never went into remission. Like when I was 14, I started having all the symptoms of, like, they're really gross symptoms, so I'm sorry, but like bloody diarrhea, horrible cramping, weight loss. Yeah, that's pretty much
probably ending up
stuff.
in the hospital a couple times.
Yeah. So I did not end up in the hospital until later on with surgery complications, but that is super common for people to end up in the hospital just with a bad flare up, because they might need IV fluids or IV steroids or something like that. But for me, the first line drug didn't do anything. Second line drug didn't do anything. Third line drug didn't do anything. And kind of throughout that, because they couldn't just let these symptoms run rampant, I was on and off prednisone, which I'm sure most people know it's a steroid. It's like a glucocorticoid. So it's kind of the drug version of your endogenous cortisol. And it's very good at quelling inflammation, which like that is the only drug that ever lessened my symptoms.
Wow.
And it was super necessary for that, because I don't know, maybe I would have died if we didn't have that drug. I don't know. But as also probably most people know, cortisol and, therefore prednisone, it has a dark side too. And most people are probably more familiar with its dark side than its role as an anti-inflammatory. But from the prednisone, I had all kinds of wonky blood sugar issues. I had horrible anxiety, horrible insomnia. I was diagnosed with osteoporosis because it kind of messes with your bone metabolism. And just I had like a big old like moon face. My face was just
makes
all
your face
like
swell up, right?
Yeah, and like really fat.
Yeah.
So it was it was rough. And that's eventually why I ended up getting the surgery, because I couldn't stay on prednisone forever. Nothing else worked. And I was also, 14. And then at the time of the surgery, I was 17, and I had still never had my period. So that was another concern with the future health of my bones, is as a woman, if you're not ovulating, if you don't have normal hormone levels, that also messes with your bone metabolism.
And that you're saying is the rarity. Most people sort of build their way up to this.
Yeah. So a lot of people will be reasonably stable on the first line med for several years.
And, okay. The last thing we talked about, we got interrupted. Sorry, camera problems, technical difficulties. Was that I was asking you about people building their way up to this kind of thing, right? That you were the rare case that usually people don't go into this intense experience that you've had.
Yeah. I just like busted my way through all the levels in 2.5 years. And they were like, well, we gave it the old college try. Time to take out your colon.
Wow. And by the way, is it common to get diagnosed so early too? I feel like mostly people in their 20s get it. Or it is, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's probably like a normal curve kind of thing, where the most common is like early 20s. But I wouldn't say it's uncommon to get diagnosed as a teen.
So it's not too uncommon to get it at such an early age.
Not too uncommon. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So again, it's been almost 15 years since I was diagnosed. And I will say that the biggest change that has happened in the sort of landscape of treatment for IBD has been the microbiome revolution. Because you probably remember like sometime in the vicinity of like 2011, 2012, there was just this enormous spike in interest in gut bacteria and the microbiome. And like all this research came out and everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is the answer to everything ever.
I love it how like even the regular mom that just knows the word microbiome. 10 years ago, nobody. Now I hear I'm like microbiome, like God.
Yeah, I'm feeding my gut bugs. I'm feeding my microbiome.
People love
like
the microbiome.
The soccer mom in like the yogurt aisle.
Yeah, it's funny though, right? Like out of all the possible kind of medical made up terms, it's funny that one became so prevalent and very common.
Yeah, well, and I think it's for good reason, because it definitely is a big factor in health. And for IBD, it interfaces with obviously your gut, like it's right there. And it's also interfacing with your immune system. So it kind of hits at the autoimmune component of it and just the location of the disease. So that is, I do suspect that if my case was slightly pushed later in time, such that that knowledge was a little bit more out there, my trajectory might have been a little bit different. There might have been other things to try, like maybe like super high dose probiotics. Like there's a prescription called VSL number 3 that actually ended up helping me later post surgery when I was still having gut inflammation. But I just didn't know about it pre-surgery. And same with like fecal microbiota transplant. I tried that for my lingering issues post-surgery, but I wish that I had been able to try it pre-surgery when I still had the, target organ.
Right. And so since we're on that topic, so what else did you try? Did you try
your
diet? You obviously did. So just to give us a little touch on what you did to try to heal yourself, naturally, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So even as a 14-year-old, I was like, as soon as I was diagnosed and found out that I would just be sick forever, like there was no cure, I like couldn't process that. It seemed wrong to me. I was like, well, that's not correct. Like people aren't sick forever. Like somebody's wrong about that. And I also hated the idea of just taking drugs forever. Like that's not a solution. Like, I'm sorry.
No, it's understandable. So yeah, especially as a young kid, it must be fucking tough to hear that, like forever. That's it.
Yeah, I was just like, it was such an impactful paradigm shift. Like I just did not even, it was like, does not compute kind of thing. It wasn't even that I was like upset about it. It was like somebody's got wires crossed, because like having to take a drug forever, like that's not fixing the problem. Like the problem is just still there. So there's got to be another answer. Like there's got to be a cure. And the first thing I heard about that could be a cure was diet. And it makes sense, right? My little 14-year-old brain was like, I was so like, self-righteous isn't the word, but just like, I was like, oh, like silly doctors, like, why don't they think about nutrition? It's so obvious. Your gut is what's sick, and what goes in your gut? Food. So obviously food is what's causing it, and food is the solution. Obviously, I know now that it's not that simple, but when I was 14, I was like, I figured it out.
Hopefully
I'm smarter than the doctors.
It's okay. We all go through that trajectory. It's all right.
Yeah.
It's no big deal.
Yeah. But unfortunately, the first diet that I came across that said that it would cure, this diet claims that it cures colitis and Crohn's, was a raw vegan diet from the book Self-Healing Colitis and Crohn's by Dr. David Klein.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know it.
Yes. And I've had that book. I think I've sold it somewhere or something, but yeah, it was just one of those it was one of those like the China study kind of books, like everybody had it, so I got it. And yeah, it was basically, as far as I remember, lots of juicing, lots of raw vegan foods, right?
Yep. Yeah.
30 bananas a day kind of thing or whatever.
Yeah. And it did the whole thing of like, animal products are toxic and they putrefy in your colon. And that's why your colon is inflamed, because of the animal proteins putrefying in there. And yeah, so I went hard on the raw vegan diet and lasted a month, and then ended up so this is when I ended up in the hospital.
Okay.
It wasn't because of the ulcerative colitis. I was sort of having seizures. Like I remember feeling very off and telling my parents that I felt very off. And then it kind of rapidly escalated to the point where like we were already like getting in the car to like drive me to the hospital, because I was so like, I'm not okay. And I can't even really explain in what way I wasn't okay. I was just not okay. And I remember saying, I need to go to the hospital. And it wasn't that I was having any particular symptom that somebody could observe and be like, oh, she needs to go to the hospital. It was like an intuition. And I've really never had that feeling previously or since. So it was very, very weird, very interesting. But as I was getting in the car, I remember my dad like kind of supporting my body weight and trying to like put me in the front seat. And I just like lost all control of my muscles and was like, I couldn't even like hold my arms such that he could put his hands like under my, to get any leverage on me. I was in like noodle mode, and
Wow.
all my muscles just felt like buzzy and jittery and like tremor-y, and I couldn't control any of my muscle movements. So it wasn't quite a seizure, but it was getting there, I guess. So anyway, they brought me back inside, called an ambulance. At some point I lost consciousness. They took ages trying to put an IV in me. I was unconscious for a lot of the whole emergency room process. I remember being woken up and handed Tums to eat, I guess because they were trying to normalize my electrolyte levels, and that's how you get calcium. It's like easier than putting it in IV or something. But yeah, apparently it took them like 7 hours to stabilize my condition. And I never got like an official, this is what was wrong with you thing. They just kind of said electrolyte imbalance. And I don't know, like something about subsisting on raw juices and raw vegan food for a month really did not agree with me.
Yeah, like 1,300 calories a day or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people don't realize that that's a very low calorically diet, right? Because it's just like you have to eat like, I don't know, 30 bananas a day. That's why they do that, because it's just like not a lot of calories and just raw fruits and vegetables.
Yeah. And I was a skeleton. Like I'm 5'7" and I was 80 pounds at this point.
Wow.
For reference, I'm like 125 pounds now. I've been as heavy as 135 pounds, and nobody would have ever called me overweight or even like chubby. So I was really, really skeleton level. But yeah, anyway, enough about the raw vegan thing.
Yeah. So, okay. So maybe sometime soon after that hospital experience, you kind of stopped trying that diet. Yeah.
Yes. That was finally enough for me to stop having the cope of, oh, I'm just detoxing, I'm fine.
Yeah. This also common thing.
Yeah. I believed it too. I was like just a little longer, just like, then I'll be okay.
Yeah.
But so then I started a diet called the specific carbohydrate diet. And that was the diet that I stuck to through thick and thin until the surgery, until the colon was gone. And that one was interesting because it attached so much morality to food. Like it hooked me initially because it made more scientific sense than the raw vegan thing. Like really the creator of it, Elaine Gottschall, was well before her time, as far as she wrote this book in like the 1980s or 90s, which is well before the whole microbiome revolution that we talked about. And yet her whole framework for why people are sick with anything from autoimmune disease to even autism and stuff like that is that it's bad bacteria in the gut, like producing toxins and like a whole vicious cycle thing. And her solution is to only consume specific carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are what feed gut bacteria. Again, that's not really accurate because bacteria can eat proteins as well. But her rationale is that carbohydrates are what feed the gut bacteria. We want to starve the bad bacteria, but we want to nourish ourselves. So she actually avoided the whole like thing that keto and carnivore do now, where it's just like prioritizing avoiding the pitfalls of carbs and not paying any mind to the possible downfalls of not having carbohydrates for ourselves, for our nourishment. So she actually was pretty like wise in this sense of like, okay, we want to starve the gut bacteria, but we don't want to just deprive the human being of all carbohydrates if we can avoid it. So we just eat monosaccharides. So that's glucose, fructose, galactose, the single sugars. Because her reasoning is that those are absorbed rapidly high up in the gut, so they don't make it low enough into the gut to feed the bacteria. Because we all know that longer carbohydrates and fibers and stuff like that, things that we call prebiotics especially, travel further in the gut and feed bacteria.
Wow,
So
that is interesting. She really was ahead of her time, because in the 80s and 90s, even early 2000s, I mean, even to this day, if you ask the average person from the street, like which carbohydrates you should eat, right? Simple sugars or the complex, everybody would say complex because it's complex. And
yeah, it was very innovative.
Interesting.
Where she went wrong, aside from not really having the full story and not being totally accurate in the actual like what's going on, which is probably the bigger problem. Like I said, so much morality attached to foods. Like allowed foods were called legal and non-allowed foods were called illegal. So like I was 15 at this point, and I was like all over the like Yahoo groups, like those email servers for this diet. And I was on there with like, it was basically all or mostly like older adults who were treating themselves, or older adults who were helping their kids who were my age. And so it was like all of these adults in this like 15-year-old. But yeah, like a common phrase you would see on there is like, oh, I ate some illegals today. It's just like, because of the way my personality was, that whole framework really sucked me in and really lodged itself in my brain. But in hindsight, like that's such a dysfunctional way to approach food and approach nutrition.
All bad or all good.
Yeah. And just to paint a picture of like my personality back then, I remember visiting a naturopath, and they did like stool tests on me and stuff like that. But I was telling her about this diet that I was on, and she made the suggestion to like, oh, why don't you try something like white rice or white potatoes? Like maybe that might help you gain a little bit of weight, or something like that. She didn't, at least I don't remember her giving any good reasons, which if she had given good reasons, I might not have reacted the way that I did. But I lost it. Like I was kind of sobbing inconsolably, like in the office and then also in the parking lot, because I was so threatened by this authority figure, not understanding what I believed to be like the correct framework for thinking about why I'm sick and how to get better. And for suggesting that I just abandon it. Like the thought of like, that was like my safety net, this understanding, this framework. And man, it was pretty bad.
You can't blame yourself for that. When you're sick,
no, I was
and
young.
when you're down,
yeah,
and you're young, it's like, of course, because you want to figure it out. You haven't kind of given up, well, not given up, but I guess you haven't come to full terms that it's, there's something deeper going on here, and you're going to need some time. You kind of that's why people gravitate towards extremes, right? It's like,
totally.
You want to find your answer,
Yeah.
So you follow, did you have a point with that diet when you stopped doing that and then moved on to something else? And didn't get better.
Yeah, I just didn't get better. I was too afraid to try a different diet because nobody nobody approached me with a better option. So I wasn't just going to abandon ship unless I had, a bigger, better ship to jump over to. Like, I don't care if my ship is sinking. If I don't have something to jump onto, I'm not just going to leave it. So yeah, I stayed on that diet until had the surgery, had the colon taken out. It was horrible.
The experience of it, or the post, or all of it?
All of it, really. Just to give a brief idea of like what it entails, it's a 2-part surgery because they take out the colon and they make a J pouch out of the end of your small intestine, which is like, it's like a fake colon. But they can't just have, fecal matter kind of going all the way through you and like running over all of those fresh wounds in the J pouch. So while the J pouch heals, they kind of divert your intestines through your abdomen. Like they poke a hole in your side and poke your intestine through it and cut a hole in your intestine, and it poops out into a bag. And it's called an ostomy. So I had an ostomy bag for 2 months while my J pouch healed. And, a lot of people are cool with the ostomy life. A lot of people end up with an ostomy for their whole lives because for various reasons. My anatomy did not appreciate it. So I kept my intestines kept like pretzeling themselves, and I was in the hospital a ton with blockages. I had to have an emergency surgery to get untwisted. The blockages were horrible because it was basically like, if stuff can't go down, it wants to come back up. So I was just like nauseous and vomiting and dry heaving and writhing in pain, and don't recommend. But I made it through. I survived, and a lot of my, like, the ulcerative colitis went away. So a lot of the like major cramping and major urgency and major bleeding, all of that was kind of knocked down. But I was still left with some very obvious autoimmune tendencies. So I would occasionally get pouchitis, which is essentially the J pouch version of ulcerative colitis. It's like, instead of your colon being inflamed, your new J pouches. So still with the pain, still with the urgency. I still had psoriasis on my scalp. I had poor healing and recovery. So I was still bleeding, like constitutively, like all of the time. And they scoped me repeatedly. And even when there was no active inflammation, I just had this like ulcer around the surgery site that refused to heal. And the doctors couldn't do anything about it. Like they tried like steroid enemas, all kinds of different stuff, and it just wouldn't heal. And a brand new thing that I had to deal with which happened immediately after the surgery. I started having what would later be diagnosed as bipolar 2. So basically I would have these really like intense depressive episodes, and then some periodic shorter, not full mania, because that's like bipolar 1, but it would be kind of a hypomania state where I would feel really keyed up and like anxious and generally really good, like productive and happy and all of that. But like I wouldn't sleep, and I was just kind of in this state of heightened nervous system arousal. And it took me a while to even register that I was having like a brand new mental health problem, because I had never had mental health problems before in my life. And my surgery was first semester senior year of high school. So I missed a whole semester of school. And after the surgery, just came back for my final semester of high school. And at that stage in your life, everybody has like senioritis. So everybody's like talking about like, oh, I don't want to do anything. I'm just like procrastinating. And like, so I was like, oh, I have senioritis. That's what this is. And then I started college, and the senioritis didn't go away. It got worse.
No.
And finally I did a little Googling. I went to a psychiatrist, and it was like, okay, so like I never really accepted the diagnosis. I did not want to be medicated for it, but I sort of had to like ruefully acknowledge that like, yeah, this is like what I am experiencing is textbook bipolar 2. So that was a nice brand new thing.
And
So yeah,
and
in some
took you
ways
on a
the
whole
surgery
new-
was like helpful, good, necessary. But did it cure me?
No. So basically it just kind of gave you a new spot for ulcerative colitis. Is that what kind of happened?
Yeah,
Right.
kind
It's like
of.
instead of it being in the colon, now it's like in this healing spot.
Yeah, more or less.
Oh man. And that took you on a whole new journey.
It did.
Understandably so. And then and what have you been up to lately? Where did this take you now?
Yeah.
Where are you at now?
Yeah. So I kind of like after the surgery for a little while, I kind of kept up my previous mode of experimentation. Like I kind of relaxed on the diet thing into paleo, paleo is like kind of a liberalized version of specific carbohydrate diet. Then I went pro-metabolic for a while. I got really into SIBO stuff for a while because without a colon and still experiencing bloating, I was like, well, this makes it easy because bacteria are what make gas, and I don't have a large intestine, so it has to be in the small intestine, so therefore it has to be SIBO, so therefore I just need to kill it all. So I did a whole bunch of like antimicrobial protocols. I did a whole like self-experimentation with raw garlic, which was not good. That made weirdly it made my depression way worse.
Oh man. But
Yeah.
Dr. Rhonda Patrick says that garlic is curable for many things.
Oh God.
She does recommend raw garlic for many things.
Oh my God.
Or,
yeah, there were a lot of people who did. But yeah, for some reason after and I didn't even do it for that long. I did it for like, I don't know, a few days, but like a lot of raw garlic. And then
you must have smelled delicious.
Oh yeah, I'm sure my family loved living with me at that point. But I remember like standing at the counter making tuna patties. So I was like wrist deep in like tuna and raw egg and like all kinds of stuff. And I just started crying. And I was like, why am I crying? Like, this is weird. This is so weird. And I did not know what was going on. A few days later, I randomly like drank some sauerkraut juice, and this is another like random distinct memory I have is like after drinking the sauerkraut juice, I'm like sitting in my car driving, and I'm like so euphorically happy. And so basically something about the raw garlic made me completely dependent on like external probiotics to like manage my mood. So that was weird. Yeah, wild. And I tried a bunch of different stuff. I tried a fecal transplant. I lived in San Francisco for a couple of months to be part of a clinical trial. And they put me on rifaximin before that. And that's another thing that's supposed to be good for SIBO. So I tried all of this stuff. Nothing ever moved the needle. Kind of went through a period of nihilism and stagnation. I was just like burnt out and I didn't have anything left in me. So I was just like, well, I just have to accept that I am bleeding out of my ass and like have these digestive symptoms and have these like issues, and I'm just going to have to live my life this way. And it was only last year that I kind of got a second wind and started experimenting again. And that it was so random. The thing that sort of launched me back onto this new path where I've actually started making some progress was something called the Bean Protocol, which I found out randomly from this like random fitness influencer that I follow. And I thought it sounded so weird, so I had to look it up. And you basically just like eat a bunch of beans. It's supposed to be good to like, the idea of it is for your liver and your bile to like successfully detoxify. It has to be carried
part of it, right?
Yeah, it has to be carried out of your body. So in a way, it's kind of the same idea as the Ray Peat carrot salad. The idea is that it binds to the bile so that you poop it out instead of it being reabsorbed and recirculating. So anyway, like I'll try.
How'd that go? Beans fuck me up. I mean, I love them. Like I love the taste.
Yeah. That's why it was so counterintuitive to try. But and I posted on Instagram about this, but it's the best I've felt in a very long time. And in hindsight, a lot of my I'm trying to figure out what order to talk about this in. So one thing I noticed while I was doing the Bean Protocol is that I don't know if you're familiar with like Aura rings. They like track your heart rate variability, stuff like that. I happened to notice on my Aura data that when I started the Bean Protocol, my heart rate variability, which I had never been aware of before, went from being totally in the toilet, like in the 20s, to being like kind of normal, like in the 60s or 70s. The chart was like, and I was like, whoa, that's a change. And as somebody who had like spent a decade experimenting and never noticed really any effect of anything that I did, I was like, okay, this did something, and higher heart rate variability is good, and et cetera, et cetera. So I got on this is how I got into the world of nervous system retraining, because it's the autonomic nervous system that controls a lot of things control your heart rate, but heart rate variability is generally thought to be the effect of the varying parasympathetic impulses to your heart. And
could you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So basically, your heart has a steady rate that it beats at without any external influence, which varies by person, but is often quoted to be around 100 beats per minute. So that's higher than a healthy resting heart rate. So your autonomic nervous system has the parasympathetic branch, which people call the rest and digest branch, and it has the sympathetic branch, which people call the fight or flight branch. Parasympathetic nerves to the heart slow it down, sympathetic nerves to the heart speed it up. So generally, if you're at rest, there's a resting parasympathetic tone to the heart to keep it at a lower level than that 100 beats per minute, because if you're not doing anything, your heart doesn't need to be beating that fast. It's like an energy conservation thing that your body does. But several factors make it such that nervous input is rhythmic rather than static. So your heart rate isn't like a steady metronome. The biggest source of variation is with your breath. So when you inhale, your heart rate speeds up, and when you exhale, your heart rate slows down. And it gets way more complicated from there, but that's kind of the basics. So heart rate variability is often taken to be a measure of, some people take it as a measure of parasympathetic tone in general. Like the very simplistic way of looking at it is like, oh, if your heart rate variability is low, that means that your parasympathetic nervous system is not that active and you're in a state of stress rather than a state of rehabilitation. And there's a lot more I could say about that, but it definitely got me thinking down the lines of, what if the reason that I'm not healing and not recovering well is because my nervous system is just tuned to this state of stress rather than recovery.
So, and this all started with a bean protocol, literally.
Yeah. So random.
And you've been tracking it on your Aura ring, and you noticed that there's a big difference.
Yeah. And in hindsight, I actually have found the increased soluble fiber to be really helpful for me. And my diet is still kind of bean protocol-ish. I stopped doing like the strict thing a while ago. But in hindsight, I think the reason I saw the big change was because I was actually just not eating enough. And because one of the weird things with the bean protocol is to like keep fat away from beans, because it's like the soluble fiber will bind to the fat, so then it can't bind to the bile, so then it's like not binding to the bile in your gut. I to this day don't know how based in reality that is, but that's what they say.
So meaning you don't want to cook them in a bunch of butter or whatever.
Yeah, that's what they say. But anyway, so I was just not eating enough. So my hands and feet were really cold all the time. So I think my metabolism was just kind of lower, and my so as the heart rate variability went up, if I look at the trends for just resting heart rate, it went way down. And one of the sort of finicky things about thinking about heart rate variability is there are different ways to measure it. And the way that Aura measures it, which is the RMSSD, I can't remember what it stands for right now. It's a math thing. Okay. But it is mathematically dependent on just the heart rate in general. So lower resting heart rate leaves more room for variability in a sense. So
it's a good thing to have a lower resting heart rate.
That's something.
Yes. Again, I'm not saying that it should be dead, right? We're not being black and white here, but it seems to be that that's the trend, right? That if it's a little bit towards the lower range, not like the crazy, I don't know, some whatever free divers have it at like 40, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's something that I actually really want to look into, and is one of my ongoing projects, because of course the pro-metabolic people are like, you want your pulse rate higher because that's indicative of a higher metabolism.
Yeah. No, they say that because they just listen to Ray Pete, and they don't really have any opinions of their own, but you know.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting thing, right? Because that is the difference.
And then like, you know, sort of the general consensus of like people who are into fitness and people who are into cardiovascular health is like, yeah, you want lower resting heart rate, and that's a sign of health.
Right.
But for me, definitely the lower heart rate was paired with things like cold hands and feet, but the higher heart rate was paired with things like not being able to fall asleep at night if I ate too close to bed, because I could like feel my heart pounding in my ears. So all of these, so I think that's part of why I felt better, because my nervous system was in a sense calmed down a little bit, but it was because I wasn't eating enough. So like some things got better, some things got worse.
And so where did this new path take you?
So I like changed I had like a whole paradigm shift, and my new goal was rewire my nervous system to be in rest and digest mode. And through randomly Googling stuff about how to rewire the autonomic nervous system, I came across a program called DNRS, which stands for Dynamic Neural Retraining System. And it was kind of funny because it doesn't, in a way, it's sort of sold as like, yeah, this will rewire your autonomic nervous system, but it also kind of doesn't. But I didn't really know enough at that point to understand the distinction. So I just sent it. I was like, I'm doing this. Pay the $350, commit to the 6 months. I'm doing it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And what are you paying for the actual?
You're paying for basically 3 full days of videos to teach you about the principles behind the program and how to implement the daily practice to do it, essentially. So you have 3 days of videos and then you're just on your own. But the idea is that you've committed to this process for 6 months and you do the practice for an hour a day for 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And what has been your experience with this?
So my experience has been very, very good. Truly, it has completely changed the way that I think about health, just at all levels.
Wow.
And it's going to sound like it's very cliche to be like, oh, everything's connected, like your emotions and your mind and your body, like it's all connected. Like that's very cliche. Yes. And I also think it's very true. But I think that the way many people approach it is kind of haphazard and abstract. And through this process, and also through just pulling from all the different things that I've read and different things that I've experienced, I now have in my head a different framework for thinking about health in a way that is based around the nervous system. And if you are amenable to it, I will try to share that framework now, because I think that it can be, like, for me, it was a revolutionary paradigm shift. And I'll get into this more later about like what I've experienced and progress and stuff. But to get to that point, it was so necessary for me to have this paradigm shift of thinking about things differently. So, like, for one thing, when you hear nervous system, most people probably think like neck down, right? But the brain is part of the nervous system. Like, people tend to think about the brain as like, oh, that's the realm of psychology. There's like the brain and then there's the nervous system. But in reality, it's all one system. It's all made of the same stuff. It's all nerve tissue. And it all kind of functions similarly. So you have your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and you have your peripheral nervous system, which is your autonomic nervous system, which again is that parasympathetic, sympathetic. It controls all the stuff that you're not conscious of. So like your visceral organs, your heart rate, secretions from glands, all that kind of stuff, sweating, stuff like that. And then your somatic nervous system is all of the stuff that you're consciously aware of. So your conscious muscle movements, your conscious perceptions like hearing and smell and like touch, all of that. So, very different systems in their location in a way, in what they interact with. But the nervous system functions on a certain set of principles, and that is patterns. So like patterns, habits, and because of that, repetition. So if you think about learning, for instance, if you're learning a new thing, at first it's a brand new thing. You have to put all of your conscious attention into doing this new thing. Then you repeat it. You do it, you do it, you do it, you do it. Then it becomes autopilot. And then you don't have to think about it anymore. It goes from the realm of being conscious effort to being autopilot. And one of the ways that I've started thinking about this is just think about the development of a human, right? From when they're a baby all the way up to when they're an adult. You can kind of think about that as the layers of the nervous system, each in turn going through that process. So babies are born without a fully mature autonomic nervous system. Like they aren't really able to regulate they aren't really able to maintain homeostasis on their own. Like they aren't quite able to regulate their heart rate and their breathing and their temperature, stuff like that. That's why things like skin to skin contact and, being very close to the mother, eating very frequently, but very small amounts, all of that's very important for a baby because their autonomic nervous system is still learning how to contend with the environment, how to maintain homeostasis for those functions that as an adult become automatic. Mm-hmm. And then when you're a kid, like 2, 3, 4, you're kind of at the next level up of nervous system learning where they're learning how to contend with their emotions. Like they're going through this process of, having total meltdowns in response to things that we see as like really silly, like, oh my gosh, the banana broke in half, or like, oh, I wanted the purple cup and you gave me the purple cup and now I'm losing it because why?
A different color cup.
You don't know. Yeah. So that's where they don't yet know how to make sense of or self-regulate their emotions. And that's kind of what the parent does. The parent is there to teach them how to teach them, oh, the way that you're feeling right now is anger. Like you're feeling very angry. And this is how you can deal with anger. This is, a healthy coping mechanism for anger. This is not a healthy coping mechanism. Like, oh, you can scream into this pillow, but you can't bite me, or you can't punch your sister. And, through that process, it's not natural. It's not ingrained, and it gradually becomes natural and ingrained so that in theory, when you're an adult, if you're a well-adjusted adult, you don't really have to consciously think each time you get angry, like, oh, okay, I'm really angry, but I can't punch this person right now in the meeting, in like the business office. Like it's just natural. You're just not going to do that. So, and then as an adult, you can see it in your daily habits, right? Like the only thing, like what enables us as humans to advance and to introduce more complexity and productivity into our lives, certain things have to become automatic. And that's what happens with learning. And that's what happens with your daily habits. Those things become automatic. So then you have room for your whatever conscious, voluntary, executive function to learn new patterns, to think about new things. And so anyway, again, people think about the different arms of the nervous system as totally different worlds, but they're the same. Like they function the same way. They function based on the same principles. And those are principles that can be understood, and they're principles that can be manipulated and targeted. Because really the only difference is all parts of the nervous system, like its function is essentially communication. It's conveyance of information. The language is the same. It's just nerve impulses. The difference is the sender and the receiver. So like the autonomic nervous system, the senders and receivers are your viscera and your brainstem. For the somatic nervous system, the sender and receiver are your environment and your brain. Because think about it. If I think, so I'm sending that I want to pick up my phone right now, the receiver isn't me. It's the environment. Like my phone has just received that nerve impulse because I picked it up. And likewise, on, the other direction, the sender can be this table. It's sending smoothness, a sensation of smoothness as I touch it to my brain. And then of course, when you get into the brain, everything's connected to everything else. So there's all kind of sending and all kind of receiving all happening at the same time. But again, it's the nervous system works in predictable, understandable ways that allow us to interface with our environment and essentially decide how to adapt to it. And the reason it matters so much for health is, so how would you define health? There's a question, because I feel like this is something that seems like it should be obvious, but
it's not.
People don't necessarily know how to answer it.
Yeah, I did a podcast with Camille Julia, my last podcast, and she said, what did she say? She said inner peace, sort of, or I mean, that's pretty good. I think it's just that sort of feeling of not being. Yeah, I mean, inner peace is pretty good, honestly. It's pretty good. But again, even that can be broken down into something like, oh, what do you mean? So if you're having a hard time in life, it's like you're not healthy. Well, it's like, well, no, I guess I don't know. Maybe having inner peace, but having the ability to deal with, everyday issues and problems that will arise 100%. Whether they be
so like resiliency.
Resilient. Yeah. I think resiliency.
Ability to adapt and overcome and become stronger in response to stimuli.
Yeah. Of course, sadly, it's like that's also not infinite, right? Because, I mean, hopefully everyone believes we die. So, because otherwise you wouldn't die, right? Because if that was just infinite,
Right,
I mean, maybe some people don't, but because that also, my point is that also can be kind of broken down. But yeah, resiliency is a big part, and feeling at an inner maybe calmness is also another aspect of it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Weirdly, as sort of cliche and empty inner peace might sound on the face of it, I actually kind of agree. And I have like really extensive and convoluted reasons for that I won't get into on this podcast because it would be way too out of scope. But the way that I've started to think about health is that it has two components: the environment and your ability to adapt to it. So and both of those things need to be in order. So your environment needs to be healthy and you need to be adapted to it. Because if either of those things is messed up, you're going to be messed up. So even if your environment's healthy, if you are not adapted to it, you're sick. So that was and has been the case with me and a lot of other people with chronic illness for a long time, is that their food's dialed in, their movement's dialed in, they're like, they have enough stuff, there's no scarcity, they're safe, they're like, if you dropped a caveman into their life, the caveman would be totally fine. But for some reason, their bodies are like out of whack still. Then on the other hand, if you're perfectly adapted to your environment, but your environment is unhealthy and unsuitable for a human, you're also not going to be healthy. So like, for instance, like posture, like anybody who has bad posture, their body is just adapting to their environment. Like it's doing what it is, built to do, to adapt to like prioritize strengths and movements and positions that are demanded of it more often and yada, yada. But if through that, we kind of learn that, okay, sitting in a chair for the entire day and never moving must not be a suitable environment for a human, because humans who have adapted to that situation aren't well. They have aches, they have pains, they have limited movement, that kind of thing.
Whether it's conscious or unconscious, because it happens both ways.
Yeah. So I think a lot can be illuminated by thinking about health in terms of those two components, and thinking about it from the standpoint of, okay, what is necessary to achieve the healthy environment and the healthy adapted human? And I made a chart, which this may or may not be helpful for people, but basically, if you think about what's necessary for environmental health, right? You kind of have to have you have to have knowledge about like what is a healthy environment. Let me back up a little bit. So thinking about it in terms of nervous system, the nervous system is about communication, right? So what information content is there in this external environment and internal human being thing? So there's just knowledge and beliefs about the situation. So for instance, like questions like, what is a healthy environment? What are the logical relationships between the components of the environment? Essentially, how does the world work? And then on the internal side, what is a healthy human? What is human nature? What are the relationships between like parts of myself and other parts of myself? Essentially, how do humans work? Like, what's the conceptual framework in which we can even think about and understand these things? Then at the next level, there's perception. So you have to be able to accurately perceive your environment and also accurately perceive what's going on inside of you. And then at the next level, there's interpretation. And this is where our sort of humanness comes in, because the first two things don't really have like values attached to them necessarily. Like for instance, at the perception level, you can sense how many resources your environment has. You can sense how many resources you have, like inside of you as a person. You can sense the level of challenge that your environment poses to you. But those things don't really mean anything until some part of your nervous system interprets it. So essentially asking the question, what does this situation that I'm perceiving, either from my external world or my internal world, what does this mean for my well-being? And this is where people start talking about threat detection. And that's a very common thing to talk about when it comes to nervous system health. But after interpretation, there's also judgment, which is asking the question, what should I do about it? And those two things are pretty closely paired. So the interpretation, what does this mean for my well-being, is really closely paired to what should I do about it? And just to make this a little bit more concrete, there's, you can, if you're perceiving the resource level and the challenge level of your environment, you can be in a scarcity. On the resources axis, you can be in a state of scarcity or abundance. On the challenge axis, you can be in a state of threat or non-threat. And this is where you start kind of getting into dysfunctions can be introduced. And then, after that, there's the execution. So what you actually do externally with your environment or what your body internally does. So that framework kind of set, I can sort of talk about my notes. I can talk about what DNRS kind of is based on. So DNRS, let me back up. The way that people think about disease most commonly is that there's a problem with their environment and they need to fix it to be healthy. So like changing their diet, changing their exercise, that kind of thing. DNRS makes the kind of bold claim that a whole slew of chronic diseases, there's not actually necessarily really a problem. The dysfunction is in the threat detection place of the mind. So essentially that interpretation and judgment area,
Mm-hmm.
or it's the body's autopilot, those parts of the nervous system that have been programmed, they're just stuck in a dysfunctional pattern. Like whatever the threat was, whatever the situation was that initially created that pattern is gone, but it's still stuck in the pattern.
Yeah.
So
you can see this with people sort of like, let's say, people that grew up in a fucked up home environment, right?
Yeah.
We all kind of, I think in extreme cases, people notice those things, but I think they don't think about it too often otherwise, because it's like, in extreme fucked up situations, it's kind of like, oh, well, he grew up in a whatever terrible household and this is why he's like that. But it's like, that could be applied to a lot of things. It doesn't have to be so extreme, right? It could be, like you said, maybe you grew up in a terrible diet. Maybe your parents gave you a terrible diet or a vegan diet or whatever. It's not the actual thing that matters. It just matters that how a lot of times those programs do get written into people, right? Or however you want to put it. And then you see that as they're older.
Yeah. And so like
that's
the
sort
kind
of
of
what you're saying, right?
Sort of. And it can, like, you're kind of talking about, well, you were kind of talking about like at an emotional level or at a dietary level, but like these stuck patterns can happen at the physiological level, they can happen at the emotional level, they can happen at the cognitive level, and everything reinforces everything else. So that's why you kind of get stuck in these cycles. So the quintessential DNRS condition that the creator of it initially had and created the program to address is multiple chemical sensitivities. So people who will, walk down the detergent aisle in a Food Lion and break out in hives, and like their bodies are just like freaking out about this like scent chemical that obviously doesn't pose, like, maybe it's not like the best, greatest thing ever to like breathe in a ton of, but the vast majority of people are totally fine and totally healthy being exposed to these things. So the creator of the program was like, okay, the problem is in the threat detection. It's your body is sensing, like it's correctly sensing the environment. It's correctly sensing that there's this chemical here, but it is incorrectly determining that it's a threat to you, and is therefore incorrectly executing all of these like defensive physiological programs. And, same for any kind of allergy, any kind of sensitivity. Like, people with severe peanut allergies, obviously peanuts are not a threatening item to humans. Like most humans can eat peanuts, but people with peanut allergies, their bodies think that peanuts are so threatening.
Right. So does this program deal with those sort of things? Does it suggest that maybe people can get rid of their allergies, say, or address them or deal with them?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it also deals with, so that's kind of those are kind of patterns of response, right? Patterns of response in response to a stimulus. But then there are also patterns that are just kind of habitual. For instance, autoimmunity, like that's a pattern of your body being in chronic immune activation, even when there's nothing to defend against.
Right.
And this is, the question of how accurate that characterization of these illnesses is could be debated, and that's another topic. But if this is correct, if this is really just a problem of threat detection and stuck habits, these things can be fixed with the knowledge of how the nervous system works, which is, again, essentially through learning and threat detection. So if you can signal safety to the nervous system, so signal that it's not threatened, signal that it has enough resources, and then B, just repeat, like break the patterns that you don't want and ingrain the patterns that you do, then in theory, you're healed. And so many people have healed from just absolutely debilitating anything from, chronic Lyme to postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome to multiple chemical sensitivities to chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, anxiety, all kinds of things. So
and how about you?
Yeah. So
let's get to the juicy part. How have you applied this to yourself?
So it was a little tricky to figure out how to apply to me, because the idea of the program, again, is to signal safety as often as you can and to repeatedly pair triggers with either better habits and or signals of safety. So my stuff, I didn't really have any specific triggers. The one trigger that I thought I had was gluten. So that's kind of where I started. I was like, okay, I'm going to retrain around being able to eat gluten. And at the beginning, I was so afraid of this food that even just thinking about eating a slice of normal pizza or something would trigger me. Like I would feel anxious. I would feel like just not good. And the strategies DNRS employs to, signal safety are actually like, it really kind of only uses one strategy, which is essentially visualization. So you're trying to create an emotional landscape of positive, relaxed emotions via visualization. It's super simple. And you're also just trying to notice any patterns in your life, whether it's behaviors or thoughts or anything like that, and do whatever you can to interrupt them. So for me, this looked like anytime I felt triggered. So I was very lucky at the time to have people in my life who would regularly trigger me in conversation, just feeling misunderstood or feeling attacked or whatever. And with DNRS, I was like, oh, I'm triggered. Awesome. Let me go do my practice. And then so I would just basically do that anytime I felt triggered. So imagining eating gluten or eating in general, or dealing with doctors or orthodontists, because I would get, from all my health history, I would feel so defensive and threatened by those people, just like not trusting that they had my best interests in mind. So, that feeling that you get when you are kind of prickly, kind of guarded, kind of like,
I feel the same way about going to doctors.
Yeah. So after a while, you kind of notice what it feels like to be triggered. And anytime, it doesn't even matter what the trigger is, anytime you're in that state, you just do whatever you can to bring yourself back into a state of kind of openness and calm. And again, emotionally, that's what DNRS focuses on. And that's kind of what I did. And 8 months in,
8 months in, 1 hour a day, or give or take, right? But okay, daily practice, 8 months straight. Okay.
Yep. I noticed a huge shift, and I would notice kind of little things. It kind of goes like this, ebbs and flows. But I kind of felt all of a sudden like, okay, hold on. Things are different in my brain. And this is everything from I'm rarely triggered anymore. People can misunderstand me. They can insinuate that, I'm a bad person or did something wrong, or I can encounter something that totally conflicts with the way I understand the world. All of these emotional things that I would previously feel kind of activated by, I'm just cool as a cucumber. No more background rumination, no more dwelling on things that have happened that other people have said. Some more concrete things that people might understand are no more overeating or like not quite binging, but in the past, one of the enduring symptoms of my depressive episodes would be this compulsive need to like eat certain foods. Like chocolate was a big one, any kind of comfort foods.
Stress eating,
and
right? People say.
Emotional eating. And it was so weird because like I didn't really want the food. I didn't feel good after, but it felt like a compulsion. That's gone. I noticed it when I had a bag of chocolate chips, like half used in my pantry for like 2 months. And I was just like, I can keep chocolate in the house now? Like, what? That's so weird. I've become more generous, which like as I'm talking, I feel like all of these things don't sound like big things, but I can't overemphasize the difference in experience that it is living in my brain. Like it is an entirely different landscape. Like I got home from a trip one day and like just felt the urge to do a few like random nice things for some friends and help some people out. I almost cried because it felt so good to just feel like a generous person, because I've never felt like a generous person. I've just always had this sort of feeling of I got to look out for myself. Like I don't have enough of whatever it is, time, resources, what have you. So to just feel this natural difference, it's little things like that are like, oh, wow, like something really has changed. And like you said earlier, when we were talking about what health means, it's, the ability to resilience, essentially, the ability to confront things that happen to us in the world and not only deal with them and recover from them, but actually come back stronger. And in the last, so this is now like month 11 of my DNRS journey. Wow. And over the last few months, I have had greater emotional demands on me, gone through probably the most intense emotional pain and just angst and just a lot of personal stuff going on, just, so happened of my whole life. And I, as it was happening, I was kind of like, oh my God, like, how am I ever going to recover from this? Yada, yada. And afterwards, I recovered and I felt okay. And it's kind of been this really weird process of like, I don't know, almost if you think about having a physical injury and then it's healed, you're sort of like, you're used to it hurting. So you're kind of like gently like testing it out and gradually like, oh, wow, like I can really use my foot again. This is amazing. And it's kind of been that sort of process with my emotional and mental landscape of like kind of poking around in my brain, like, wow, am I really okay? Like, does this really not bother me? Do I really feel like good? And it's very difficult to describe and explain, and I cannot overstate how like transformational it has been.
And as far as physical symptoms, what about your physical?
Yeah, so that is what's so interesting about this process, is that I started it to address my physical symptoms. I never thought that I had emotional or mental issues. I mean, the bipolar thing, whatever. Even with that, I was like, it's fine. Like I've got it handled. I just never identified as somebody who had like mental issues to deal with. So it was so surprising and unexpected to go on this whole journey. But it kind of makes sense because the strategies I was using were kind of cognitive and emotionally focused. And what I have felt recently is, yes, I have started to see physical progress. Like there are certain things that are like hard successes. Like for instance, I eat whatever I want now. I eat gluten and I don't have any problem with it.
Wow.
I'm hesitant to call that a physical victory because as confident as I am about saying like, yes, I have had a significant mental and emotional shift, I feel like I'm not quite there with the physical yet. But I feel like I'm on the right track. I suspect with the gluten that either it became not a problem after the surgery and I was just too afraid to try it for the decade since then. Mm-hmm. And I finally, unwound all of the emotional stuff that was going on that enabled me to eat it again, mm-hmm. in which case that's kind of still a victory. Or maybe it was never even a problem with me to begin with. I really like, I think that's possible. But like, there are little things. So like, I haven't had a pouchitis episode since starting the program. I've seen noticeably less bleeding, seems to be definitely less psoriasis. So less autoimmune activation in general. I seem to be recovering better from workouts and actually building muscle instead of just getting injured. I 100% feel better in my body, like just relaxed and more, I don't know, just better mm-hmm. day to day throughout mm-hmm. the day. But I still think that most of those are probably like, I don't think that I've had my physical shift yet. Like, I don't think that I'm yet healed, okay. But I do think I'm on the right track and I've changed my approach. And this is where I think a zoomed out, more expansive framework for nervous system rewiring is needed mm-hmm. because again, DNRS is kind of very focused on certain conditions and certain tools. Whereas if you have the right framework, almost anything can be a tool if you just know how to use it. So if I'm trying to heal, reprogram my lower nervous systems, like the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system, it's going to make a lot more sense if I speak in their language to, so to speak. So for instance, rather than, trying to do stuff with my emotions and my thoughts all up in here, speak in a language that they can understand. So that means like warmth and touch and basic things like that, that is interacting with those nerves directly. So again, the approach is the same. You're still trying to signal safety and you're still trying to interrupt dysfunctional patterns and program functional patterns. But the ways that you would signal safety to the autonomic nervous system is stuff like keeping your temperature regulated. So not relying on your own nervous system to like deal with huge temperature fluctuations. So being really cognizant of like, oh, if my feet are cold, like put a heater on them. I used to have this like this idea that I had all of these really strong like oughts and shoulds about how my body, like what my body should be capable of. Like, I'm a grown ass adult. My body should be able to keep its own feet warm. Or like, I'm a grown ass adult. I shouldn't have to snack between meals. Like my body should be fine eating 3 square meals a day. But
get rid of those expectations and just
it's been there's such small things, but this is the first time in my life where I feel noticeable improvements every single day. Just being consistent with helping my body out wherever I can to, keep my blood sugar kind of balanced throughout the day rather than making it deal with these big fluctuations. Because again, a fully functional, well-adjusted adult should be able to do cold plunges and eat only a couple times a day and whatever. Like those are parts of being a strong, healthy, functioning adult. But if you've got some dysfunction, if you're trying to heal, you got to meet your body where it's at. And that's sort of the approach that I'm taking now. And what's so funny is the last big pouchitis flare that I had, it was like a little over a year ago. It was awful. I had awful pain, really bad bleeding, was having to get up like 6 times a night to go to the bathroom. And I was so frustrated and confused because I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't eat anything weird. Like, why is my body doing this? And like the thing that I had done the day before, so like immediate temporal relation, is I had been out and about. I had a date. I had a baby shower. I didn't eat anything bad. I didn't eat any gluten, but I didn't quite eat enough. And I was kind of cold all day. And I was kind of emotionally down. Like I didn't really feel a lot of hope at the date. I felt a little bit isolated at the baby shower. Like, oh man, like I'm all alone. I don't have a baby. And so in hindsight, my body was telling me the things that stress it out. It was stressed out being cold. It was stressed out not having enough food. It was stressed out feeling hopeless and sad and isolated. And I spent all of these years like kind of assuming that I knew what was best for it or what it needed for me, being like, oh, like I'm not giving it any bad foods, so therefore
do what you're told.
yeah, exactly. And but all this despite never having really any positive feedback from my body for doing these different diets, and these times where it would very clearly communicate to me, instead of like taking that information on board and being like, huh, interesting, maybe this means something, I would be like, this doesn't make any sense. Why doesn't the world make sense? Why doesn't my body make sense?
Well, sadly, I think we're not really encouraged to think about these things whatsoever. We're kind of encouraged to think that 3 square meals, 8 hours of sleep, don't drink too much alcohol. Just
really basic stuff.
Which is fine advice. It's not like it's useless advice, but as you said, it's like you could do all those things, and then have the worst day of your life, and your body will probably respond to it, right? So,
and then also when I was first diagnosed, I didn't mention this, but the thing that happened immediately prior to me getting sick is that I became vegetarian for no reason. I just, thought, I was told that it was the good, correct, right thing to do for your health, for the environment, for the animals. And I was this like skinny, healthy 14-year-old girl, but I was like, I was like throwing away my egg yolks and not eating meat, and just like putting all of these restrictions on my food because of some external instruction morality framework. And in hindsight, again, the temporal relationship between that happening and me getting sick was right there. My body didn't like that. And then is it really any wonder that I never went into remission when my response to being sick was to do that same thing harder? It's like, oh, I'll just pick a different externally dictated, morally laden, restrictive dietary framework to impose on my body.
Which is very difficult to even live with, even if you're not experiencing any symptoms. You know what I'm saying? Like it's hard. You'll go to a restaurant and there's not a lot of vegan food or vegetarian food, and it's just like, because most people don't do that. So
so, and that is one of the biggest things that shifted with my DNRS work is I don't have these orthorexic habits anymore. I don't restrict my food. I don't have any idea of like what's good or what's bad. I don't none of that stuff. And it's really, I feel like that shift, which was essentially a mental and emotional shift, was crucial for setting me up on the right path to actually make progress with my physical health. So in a sense, this is like an interim analysis. It's like such a weird way to put it. I work in clinical research. But yeah, this is like okay, I've had these like astoundingly life-changing impacts on certain levels of my nervous system. So my mental and emotional health are just better than they've ever been, and better than I even thought that they could be. And I am making progress with my physical stuff. And for the first time ever, things actually make sense. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
I hope to be reporting back.
Yes, I was just going to say, we would love to check up with you in a few
Yeah.
months and do this again. Seriously.
Yeah.
And where can people find out about this program? What's just the simplest, easiest way for them to access it?
So they could just Google DNRS.
And by the way, you're not like affiliated. You're not like working for them just because people are, you're not one of their counselors or whatever.
No, I'm not. And
just something that you found through randomly Googling, right?
I just randomly found it. And I think that there's a great need for a more comprehensive and targeted framework, both for understanding disease at all the different levels and also selecting the right tools for the job. And thus, like, I'm not aware that something like that exists. So if people follow along with me, they'll probably see me trying to hammer out something like that, just little by little. But for now, and that's the other tough thing, I've recommended DNRS to a lot of people, but with the caveat that it will, like, the concepts are good, the tools can be helpful, but I really, really think that it needs to be like personalized and amended to the different things. And that just doesn't exist yet. But anyway, with those disclaimers, you can just Google DNRS, Dynamic Neural Retraining System. Okay. I also have a blog post on my website that lists out all of the different nervous system retraining programs that I'm aware of. There are a lot. A lot of them are like copycats of each other. I don't know if DNRS was the original and other people ripped it off or vice versa, but my website's alyssaluck.com and
I'll link
it's on there.
For sure. Okay.
And yeah, if you follow me on Instagram, I think it's alyssa.luck.
I'll link you up.
Will. Cool. Yeah, I'll probably be talking about this stuff a lot more because, like I said, I think that this way of approaching health is just incredibly powerful and has incredible potential and has a lot of myths around it and needs some targeting and some fine tuning. But I don't know. I find it very exciting to think about.
Well, it's exciting for me, as like I said, just to hear this from somebody that just found it through random Googling. You know what I'm saying? Because usually you hear these things, it's like I said, they're a practitioner or they're selling it to you or they're affiliated with you. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Because maybe you do become affiliated with them somehow because you love the program. But I'm just saying.
I won't.
Well, I'm just saying it does make a great, thing that you just found this out and it's been working for you. And so with that said, we'll be looking forward to having you on the show again so we can update on what's going on. And I will link your blog post, website, and everything else that's there. And thank you for coming on. This was awesome.
Cool. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Things you own end up owning you.